Okay, this lesson is going to focus on composition and value and color, because it really helps to get back to what's important about the color, which is the value. The difference here being that when we do the black and white, we're going to use ivory black, titanium white, and then as that dries, we're going to paint directly onto the black and white. A little bit different than the usual of doing a black and white study. We do the smaller black and white study and set it aside and use it as a reference as we do a larger color. But here we're going to do maybe a little bit larger black and white, 8 by 10, 9 by 12, 11 by 14, and after that we're going to paint directly onto the black and white. It helps you, I think, realize the importance of the value a bit more, of how we really need to be accurate on the value at the same time while we're thinking about color. This is the image I'm going to use here. What I want to do first of all is think in terms of cropping these, and again, if you don't have Photoshop, not a big deal. I'm going to be doing mine on a thumbnail drawing anyway. So do the thumbnail drawings, come up with a composition that works better than the photograph, even if it's nothing but cropping. Crop this here a little bit more. The idea being that my focal point here is these goat pins, and then the olive tree here. It's kind of my focal point. What I'm not interested in here is the fence. Probably a bit too much sky, a little bit too much on the right side as well. So when I crop, so I want to get rid of the fence. Even if I don't get rid of all of it in the image, I will in the painting. It's probably a bit more square than I wanted. I'll probably have it a bit more of a rectangle. But you can see now the darker shapes. It's kind of a overcast, hazy day, but all the verticals are upright because the sun is in front of the viewer. So all these, for the most part, are going to be dark with just light on the tops. That helps me simplify, keeping everything that's upright dark and that's slanted or flat a lot lighter. And when I do the thumbnail, when I start out, you don't always start off just putting in the dark shadow pattern. Sometimes you can if it's real evident, and sometimes it's easier to simplify by doing that. But what I at least want to start with is these big shapes. The tree shape, the ground here, trees background, the buildings, kind of the flat plane, and then the slanted. And do that real lightly and not being too concerned about being accurate. I want an overall feel for these trees, but just with a big simple shape. I can come back later when I press down harder and get the shape a bit more accurate. But don't try and be too picky with shape right off the bat. What I'm also trying to do here is, and this photograph has a lot of it anyway, but look for angled lines. This is a good reference because it doesn't have any straight flat lines. Everything is angled, rounded. Even this one that looks kind of straight, I'm going to make it a little bit more kind of half rounded. But all these angled lines are different. In other words, they're not repeating each other too much, and if they are, I can change it a little bit. I'm changing this one right here. Really nice angled lines everywhere. Nothing's too straight, too vertical. It just works well. So that's what I want to try and do to set up the thumbnail. As I go to the thumbnail, I do this real lightly. This doesn't look real light. But if I make a mistake on these lines, or I don't have something quite over far enough, if it's light enough, I can just draw right over it. Just keep scribbling. I generally put the pencil down on the paper, don't pick it up, and I just start scribbling like this. And if I do it light enough, I don't have to erase. I don't want to erase anyway. After I get that down there, that light scribble or gesture to get the large shape set up, then I can press down. I start with this shape here and just press down harder. And if I make a mistake here, pressing down harder, then I just start over. Just don't spend time erasing. I've got a dark shape there. I've got my angled lines already. Now I'm just blocking in these dark shape, overlapping them as much as possible. But the shadow pattern is set up that the viewer's eye comes in here and winds around and comes back again. I can do several different directions. I'm trying to connect that shadow pattern to make the composition flow better. And then in my value painting using ivory black, titanium white, I want to set up as big a shape and simple a value as possible with that shadow pattern. But this shadow will be a little darker than the shadow on the ground. And this one will be a little darker than the shadow on the trees back in here. And this will be darker than the shadow back there, and so on. So I might have several different values of dark, but I want to get them in there as big and as simple as possible. Same thing with the light grass, darker than the light road. The light road back in here maybe a bit darker than this road. I have to compare the values of all these big lights back in here, but they're big. Don't break them up too small too soon. Keep things big and simple. Then after everything is covered, just like with the color, after everything is covered, then I can do variations. I can do some halftone in here and some smaller shadows. A few small darks within this light here. There's 3 or 4 values within this building here. Almost all of it's shadow, but 3 or 4 different shadows. Lights on top of the trees. And simplify, decide what you can leave out, how much detail, especially in the background here, is too much pickiness. I want to keep it simple. So it is just like a finished color painting, but strictly black and white. But keep it simple, because remember we have to mix colors for these values. So if I get 40 different values up in here, my color is going to be impossible. Same thing with the tree. If I can keep the values to about 4 to 5 values in this whole tree, the shrubbery and the trunk, color will be a lot easier. So this will be an exercise in simplifying and strictly thinking about values, separating the planes, and so on. This is one in Utah. Barn's a bit too centered, so you have to crop. It doesn't necessarily need to be cropped this way, but more this way. In other words, side to side instead of top to bottom, because the barn is not centered going that way, it's just centered going that way. So move that off center. All these images have real strong light direction. So finding the shadow pattern. Don't get caught up in too much detail in here. Simplify it. The big values are, of course, the big shadows and the big areas of light. Then I want to suggest maybe a few of these smaller ones. Keep it pretty simple. Don't be hitting every little dark accent in there. Because again, we got to put color on top of this black and white paint. And same thing with this one. Real strong light direction. Careful with the shadows here, too dark compared to the dark of the greens up in here. So I have to lighten up that shadow slightly so we get the planes set up right. In the black and white painting, add some detail. Treat it as a finished painting. Just remember, you're going to come back with color and cover it up. But it's not the real tiny detail. Don't worry about the stripes and the metal building here. Suggest some of this stuff, but don't overdo it. Don't try and see everything in there. Now this one doesn't, it's more midday, the light's coming straight down. So my areas of contrast are not the big shadows from low light like the other photographs. The areas of contrast are the light roof against the dark trees, and the dark trees against the lighter ground, and the lighter hills against the darker trees. So that's the shadow. Of course, the big shadow pattern underneath the hay barn there. Got a little bit of something on the lens there that got blurry. But this one also, crop it. You can crop it a bunch of different ways, but it has too much sky and probably a bit too much foreground. And when I crop it, I get rid of excess stuff on the sides and top and bottom, but I also make my focal point a bit bigger. And then lastly, this is another one's in grease. Too much stuff going on here. All this is just real confusing and cluttery up in here. So getting rid of a lot of that. I mean, my focal point is obviously the church. So getting rid of a lot of that stuff on the left side that really didn't have anything to do with it. Putting the steeple, or whatever that's called there, just off center to the, well, it's a little too centered. So I would move it over slightly there, so it's off center a little bit. And you can crop it a bunch of different ways. I try 2 or 3 different ways on your thumbnail drawing and or on the computer. I would recommend doing the thumbnail drawing. period, whether you have a computer or not. Just get in the habit of doing it that way. A little more work, but you learn a lot more compositionally.